The SCP Foundation stands for either Secure, Contain, Protect, or Special Containment Procedures, depending on which level of SCP employee that you ask, and which of them knows their mission statement from their Mount Golgotha. In essence, the SCP Foundation is a secret organization whose sole responsibility is to contain individuals, entities, locations, and objects that violate natural law and life as we know it. This responsibility is entrusted to them by multiple governments across the planet, and they maintain their objective on a global scale, working within the shadows of modernity to protect humanity's sense of reality and normalcy. Let's segue though, because in real reality, the SCP Foundation is a fictional body of web-based collaborative writers who, over the course of 10 years, have established one of the largest shared fictional universes in history, which contains thousands of separate creative pieces. It's staggering how much depth this fictional world has, and the SCP community and its moderators are notoriously strict with their quality control standards, and anything that appears to be subpar is quickly removed. The SCP Foundation first sprouted into life on the X forum of 4chan, an interesting backwater of the internet dedicated to all things paranormal. The first canonized post, SCP-173, was posted in 2007, and thus the crazy, creepy, and oftentimes confusing fictional world was given life. So let's step into that world then and speculate the real world implications of this secret, shadowy SCP Foundation. First, we have to address the possibility of a secret organization actually existing, because as history has taught us, they definitely can and do. In 1945, the Manhattan Project was well underway, and it's estimated that no more than a few dozen people in the entire world knew the full meaning of its objective. It is believed that more than 100,000 people were employed to work on the Manhattan Project, and were warned that if anything leaked, it was punishable by a 10-year prison sentence and a $100,000 fine. You might not think it, but that's enough to make people keep their mouths shut, and their employees worked away in secrecy like moles in the dark. So the SCP Foundation, which in actual fact has quite an honourable objective, keep the world safe from paranormal entities which would otherwise make life pretty damn rotten. It wouldn't be absurd to believe that its employees understood the importance of secrecy. Imagine a grizzled old veteran, he's been on the job nearly 30 years, and he's seen stuff that would make your Rice Krispies snap, crackle and rot. He's sat at the bar knocking back a large Lagavulin, and all the locals have no idea that this guy saves them from unspeakable horrors like most people do their laundry. Yeah, at the start, fear of imprisonment and large fines would have been the SCP's way of keeping its staff stum, but over time they'd have created quiet superheroes who just get the job done. The SCP Foundation mission statement speaks of humanity's ancient battle with the paranormal. In it, it's said that early humanity huddled around small fires, fearing the things that they didn't understand. Evil creatures, gods and demons, begging them to spare us. But as time went on, evil dwindled and humanity rose up, making sense of the unexplained, the absurd and the impossible. They say that while the rest of mankind dwells in the light, the SCP Foundation stands in the darkness to fight it, contain it, and shield it from the eyes of the public. So imagine waking up every morning and that's your reason to get up and go to work. Yeah, no one's going to be whistleblowing at the SCP Foundation. Those guys are stone cold, unappreciated, unrelenting badasses. They're not going to be running their mouths to anyone. But let's continue the speculation, and let's imagine a scenario where an SCP entity got out. Because currently in the Foundation containment is an SCP that could potentially bring ruin to the whole organization. SCP-139 is a poorly preserved hominid skull that is locked deeply away in an unopenable room under constant 24/7 armed guard. Why? Well, the SCP Foundation doesn't really know. They don't really even know what it is, but they're absolutely terrified of it. SCP-139 has been found throughout history at the site of multiple mass slaughters. In England, roughly around the 1950s, after explorer Douglas Winthrop had found the skull on an expedition, and then he slaughtered 7 of his friends after succumbing to madness. Then it popped back up many years later in the Yukon, in the community of Caribou Crossing, where the whole town was brutally murdered and stacked in a large pile at the centre of the town's chapel. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a Chekhov's gun that's just waiting to go off. So let's imagine then the SCP Foundation is in tatters. Hundreds of its staff have succumbed to the school's madness, slaughtering each other after a reckless employee accidentally opened the wrong door. That'd attract some attention, right? Well, maybe it would be picked up by a keen-eyed journalist waiting to break the story of a lifetime. But the SCP Foundation would just sweep it under the rug. They'd mechanize their multiple contingency plans that had been meticulously mapped out in case of such a crisis. They'd seal the whole building with cement and make out that a research lab had spilled some radioactive material and people would just move on, no questions. Because it's crazy to think, but cover-ups are actually pretty simple. Area 51, Watergate, the whole of the CIA, hell, we've already said the Manhattan Project. It's already played out in real time throughout history, and they're just the ones that have inevitably surfaced. What else is out there lurking in a manila dossier in a long forgotten filing cabinet? So, we know it's just pure nonsense, right? Or just maybe there's some version of the SCP Foundation quietly operating in the shadows as we speak, protecting us from ancient evils and paranormal anomalies. Would we even want to know? Shouldn't we just let them get on with their job? I've probably already said too much.
Now, SCP-4666 has also been referred to as the Yule Man because he is only active for 12 days between the dates of December 21st or 22nd until January 1st or 2nd, similar to the 12 days of Christmas. But this is not the kind of thing, or creature, or being that you'd want to see during the holidays. In fact, you'd never want to see this thing at all because if you do, it'll be the last thing you lay your eyes on before your inevitable, gruesome death. Referred to as the Wisnockt events, SCP-4666 attacks homes in isolated, rural locations which include a family member under the age of 8 and in an area where snow will be on the ground for the 12 days. What's even more interesting is SCP-4666 is able to instantly teleport to any location north of 40 degrees latitude, although it's possible it may be able to travel anywhere on Earth. It's unknown what other abilities this SCP has, but one thing is for sure, it has no remorse. The Wisnockt events usually proceed as follows. Nights 1 to 7 will include the children of the chosen home seeing SCP-4666 near their home, whether it be in an open field behind a tree or possibly at their window watching them sleep, which has been previously reported. Nights 8 to 11, family members, including parents, now will start hearing footsteps on their roofs and in their attics. They will smell a very unpleasant smell as well, leading some to believe their home has possibly become haunted. And then on the final night, one of two things happens. In most cases, SCP-4666 will kill the entire family with the exception of one child, always under 8 years old, who it will abduct. SCP-4666 will injure the family to the point that they can't fight back or escape, and place them all in the same room, torturing them one by one while the others watch. The way SCP-4666 kills ranges from event to event, but it's almost always gruesome and horrifying. The other scenario, which happens about 15% of the time, is also quite horrific. Family members will start hearing footsteps inside their home at night, although no signs of forced entry will be present. The next morning, the children in the home will find toys at the ends of their beds, crafted from the remains of human children who fell victim to SCP-4666 previously. Law enforcement has been able to get fingerprints of the being responsible for these horrific crimes, which date back to as early as the 1st century AD in Scandinavia. Unlike humans who have a unique whorl pattern on their fingertips, this humanoid creature has a very unique double whorl pattern. The same prints that were found at all Foundation investigated scenes matched a print found in dried blood from a similar instance which occurred back in 1873. The Foundation has also been trained to suppress or falsify any media coverage of these crimes. Instead, they will make it appear to the general public as a home invasion murder. Any evidence found by non-SCP members are to be confiscated, and the subject who found said evidence will be amnesticized, having no recollection of what they saw or stumbled upon. This is clearly the SCP Foundation's way of trying to contain whatever is out there, preying on families an average of 3 times a year. So now that we know about SCP-4666, what would happen if it were in fact real? Well, it really is hard to say. How do we know something like this isn't real? Given the fact that the SCP Foundation ensures the media's reports either never see the light of day or come off to sound completely fabricated, and the fact that they pretty much erase anyone's memory with knowledge of the incident, even if this did happen, we wouldn't know. Now, of course, SCP-4666 isn't real. We know that. But even if it were, it's not like this beast randomly goes after people on the streets. It's very meticulous. Everything is planned out, and unfortunately, if you're one of its targets, there really is no stopping it. However, you'd only be at risk if you lived in a house which included a family member under the age of 8 years old. With that in mind, areas known to be at risk of getting attacked may implement laws, or at least recommendations, for families who have children under the age of 8. Putting the children or entire families under protective custody is one option, although it seems next to impossible to really stop this thing from doing what it wants. Strands of hair as well as bite marks from SCP-4666 have also been tested, and it has been determined that this creature is not human. Although it may have some similar characteristics to that of a human, regardless of whatever SCP-4666 is, one thing is for sure, it is definitely not human. Could it be an extraterrestrial being? A science experiment gone wrong? Who knows really? Until we find out where this thing came from and what, if any, vulnerabilities it may have, we may never be able to stop it. But as previously mentioned, only those who have fallen victim to the attacks would know of its existence, aside from the SCP Foundation, of course. And even those who find themselves unlucky enough to be targeted by SCP-4666, yet somehow survive, would have their memories completely erased. Which means, really, only those in the SCP Foundation studying this creature would ever know of its existence and what it's capable of. So to wrap up, even if SCP-4666 existed, which, who knows, maybe it does, we would have no idea. And that's what makes this one such an interesting case. Not only is there no telling if you would potentially be at risk of an attack, you wouldn't even know this thing existed in the first place. After a while, people may start to catch on that there is a child predator specifically targeting young children. Given that most of these scenarios would end up with a young child missing or young children finding handcrafted toys made up of another children's remains on their beds, I think it's safe to say new families would ramp up their security around the house. Alarm systems, cameras, as well as barriers and fences of all sorts would most likely see an increase in worldwide sales. Other than that, not much would change. Aside from the fact that, of course, the general public would be afraid of a serial killer who invades homes around Christmas time. But that seems to be an unfortunate reality already. Unless maybe it is SCP-4666.
Now, let's redirect our focus to SCP-3008. Have you ever been lost in an IKEA? Apparently it's a pretty common occurrence. Those big labyrinthian warehouses make it real easy for you to take a wrong turn and lose your bearings entirely. The absolute magnitude of these modular furniture stores also make it easy for people to camp out overnight, as proven by the countless YouTubers who decided to stick around after dark a few years ago. It may seem like fun, but if you change a couple factors, your trip to IKEA can quickly accelerate into terrifying territory. This is especially true when the IKEA is endlessly big and full of violent, faceless monsters. Yeah, you came into the store to buy a bedside table and a lamp, and now you're fighting for your life using the lamp as a weapon. Oh boy. SCP-3008 appears to be a big, abandoned IKEA building. Nothing too weird about it from the outside, just a blue and yellow warehouse in an empty car park. However, once you enter through those front doors, everything changes. Anyone who strolls through the sliding doors and walks far enough to be out of sight will be translocated into SCP-3008-1. Usually the victims won't notice until they try to leave and are unable to find the exit. With no visible walls and nothing implying that the open space inside will end, this IKEA might be infinite. It has all the regular features though, long winding aisles, different departments populated with furniture for specific rooms, a cafeteria every once in a while. You better like Swedish meatballs because that's all you're getting for the foreseeable future. Apparently a whole bunch of people have wandered into this furniture store and never found their way out. Many have been present since before the Foundation contained the IKEA. Groups of folks have formed rudimentary civilizations and created little settlements to live in. There are multiple settlements all spread out across many kilometers within the ever-expanding Swedish megamart. These towns help the folks living inside feel like people again, but they also perform a more urgent function. They defend against attacking entities. Designated as instances of 3008-2 or staff, these entities are humanoid in shape but often have exaggerated and inconsistent bodily proportions. Anyone who has seen one will describe it as either too short or too tall. In addition to their weird bodies, these creepy creatures lack a face or organs. Plus, they're always wearing the IKEA uniform. Yellow shirt, blue pants. Yeesh, not exactly the customer service we're looking for, huh? Oh, no thanks, I'm just browsing now, thanks. No, please leave me alone. 3008-1 has a day-night cycle consistent with the opening and closing times of a regular IKEA. The lights will flicker on in the morning and abruptly shut off once it's night. During nighttime, the freakish 3008-2s will become extremely violent and attempt to kill any human nearby. As they rip and tear, they can also be heard uttering phrases like, "The store is now closed, please exit the building." Don't you think I would would if I could. Once fluorescent daylight returns, they revert back to a passive state and will not bother anyone unless provoked. There are exits and people have escaped, but the locations of these seem to be inconsistent, always moving around, which makes it very difficult for individuals to make a concerted effort to leave. The most notable escapee made it out while the Foundation maintained containment. He was being chased by an instance of 3008-2 and killed immediately upon exit. Foundation agents discovered an IKEA branded notebook on him with an account of his experience in the anomalous store. His account details wandering alone for a while before coming across a human settlement known as Exchange. Yes, the town was named after the department it was nearest. He lived there for about 6 months, achieving some sort of normalcy. It was kind of like when the people settled down in The Walking Dead, scavenging for supplies and warding off a steady influx of walkers. Crude weapons were fashioned and lots of meatballs consumed for sure. Although he noticed there wasn't any weather in this space, and all the people living in the settlement had very different accounts of the reality that they originated in. Some folks had no knowledge of things like the Statue of Liberty or the International Space Station, even though they seem to come from English-speaking North America. This opens the possibility of 3008 being multi-dimensional, with people being fed in from different universes. Right before the journal writer escaped, Exchange was demolished by a massive group of the staff. Apparently they're attracted to their own corpses and will attack whatever is nearby. Someone had left a chunk of staff in the supply boxes, which lured an insane amount of these things to the settlement. There were so many staff corpses being piled up against the barricades that they could literally just climb over the bodies of the previous ones into the safe zone. That is like some World War Z type stuff. So now that we've got a pretty vivid picture of what's going on inside SCP-3008, we need to start thinking about what would happen if it were real. How would we deal with an anomaly like this if it really existed? Oh boy. The easy answer would be to destroy it outright, but who knows what would happen to the people within. Plus, how do we figure out exactly where this thing is? And it seems to pull people from all sorts of different dimensions, so there's no guarantee that taking out one facade would really make any sort of difference at all. So what would probably end up happening was a whole lot of college students and city dwellers ending up trapped in the catacombs of Meta IKEA. Some people would even enjoy it. The modern world involves so much existential dread, it would be nice to have a singular purpose for a while, just survive. No currency, no taxes, no rent, no career aspirations, just fortifying defenses and scavenging for IKEA frozen yogurt. The journal left behind by the escapee is a pretty solid description of what might happen if something like this were real. People would band together for safety and rebuild some semblance of a society. It's just what people do. His account was quite sunshiny though, with people from different settlements being totally generous and non-aggressive. This is less likely to happen in real life, well, because people are dicks. Yes, different groups would band together and form alliances based on mutual agreements, but there's always something in short supply and people don't often want to do without the essentials. So inevitably faction-based combat would break out, adding to the dangers of the already terrifying staff, like a true Walking Dead scenario. Maybe due to the anomalous properties of the IKEA, there'd be enough food and drink and shelter for everyone. But even then, interpersonal conflicts about the best courses of action, IKEA politics, and relationships would arise. It's human nature to fight with each other. Eventually, a hierarchy would be established and different groups would be afforded different amounts of power. Once the dust settled, I think there would be potential for society to actually take leaps and bounds forward. There's enough technology in an IKEA to allow for some big scientific brains to recreate a lot of the amenities that exist in the outside world. Although plentiful, I don't think the staff are very smart and could likely be kept at a distance with electric fences, turrets, or other security measures. Whatever they can dream up. The space inside is boundless too, so I am sure advanced methods of transportation would be developed as well. Soon enough, a parallel modern society would exist within 3008, with all sorts of IKEA brand items repurposed to be everything people ever needed. Who knows? Maybe once the society spreads far enough, the exits will become more apparent. But at that point, would the folks even really want to rejoin society as we know it? They've recreated their lives here and probably don't feel like readjusting to the cruel, capitalistic hell world on the outside. Long live the IKEA people. And that's what there is to say about that. What do you think? Would a society blossom in the IKEA, or would it crumble? How would you deal with being stuck inside SCP-3008? Are there any other major megastores that would work better? Let me know down in the comments.
So SCP-2317, it may very well be the most dangerous SCP out there. If not, it's definitely one of them. And it's such a dangerous monster, or creature, or being, we don't even know what it actually is. It's referred to as an entity that could destroy the entire world. Some refer to it as the Scarlet King, while others claim they're two separate entities. It seems SCP-2317's identity is up to interpretation. Some believe it is in fact the Scarlet King, which is based on SCP-231-7, one of 7 variations of SCP-231. This is because SCP-231-1 through 7 were rescued from a cult called the Children of the Scarlet King. All of the SCP-231-1 through 6 have died one way or another, with the only remaining SCP-231 being 7. That being said, it seems like that SCP-231-7 is quite literally the only thing holding SCP-2317 in place. So if SCP-2317 isn't the Scarlet King, what exactly is it? Well, this one seems to be extremely intricate and complicated. Technically speaking, SCP-2317 is a wooden door. Now, a wooden door probably wouldn't make you question whether the end of the world is near, but what's located beyond the door surely will. It's believed SCP-2317 is a portal to another dimension. The dimension is an everlasting open area of land, more specifically a salt pan, which is just a large area made up mostly of salt and other minerals. There are no bodies of water nearby, and the land has been dried up for thousands of years. This land is also home to the monster that is a part of the umbrella that is considered SCP-2317. As previously mentioned, technically speaking, SCP-2317 is a wooden door, but SCP-2317 is really everything that happens behind that wooden door, which includes this evil entity also referred to as the Unnamed Devourer of Worlds. This creature is allegedly 600,000 feet tall and was bound by 7 chains or hooks, which are correlated to SCP-231-1 through 7. However, as previously mentioned, all SCP-231-1 through 6s have been terminated one way or another. This means that only one chain or hook, SCP-231-7, is the only thing keeping this evil entity bound. SCP-231 has levels of security for specific procedures, which request specific orders to be carried out depending on your level of security clearance. However, upon further research, it has been determined that these ritualistic procedures are completely useless and were implemented to prevent SCP employees from panicking. It seems there is no real way to contain SCP-2317 beyond what's already been done. These magical chains, or whatever it is that's holding this entity in place, are irreplaceable. Unfortunately, of the 7, 6 of them have been broken, meaning there was only one left stopping this entity from destroying our world. Although attempts have been made to not only repair the chains as they were breaking, but to recreate new chains as well, nothing seems to be efficient enough. It seems to only be a matter of time, whether it's months, years, or decades, until SCP-2317 is able to break free. This would lead to the sure destruction of Earth and the human race. So now that we know about SCP-2317, what happens if it's real? Well, I think it's quite obvious. I mean, it's been given the name Devourer of Worlds for a reason. This thing breaks free from what's keeping it bound, and we're done for. That being said, it seems SCP-2317 is so secretive that majority of the professionals in charge of it don't even know its true power or identity. From the most basic SCP employee up until the level of security clearance before the top, everyone is under the impression a daily ritual must be done to stop SCP-2317 from breaking free. Only the Overseer Council know the truth behind SCP-2317, that it can't be stopped by anything. However, rather than sending the entire Foundation into a frenzy fearing for their lives, the Overseer Council has put a plan into effect to try to find ways to contain SCP-2317 while giving their employees a false belief that they are doing everything in their powers to do so already. So although the end of the world would be inevitable at the hands of SCP-2317, that wouldn't happen until it was able to break free from its final chain, which is SCP-231-7. And up until the end of the world, we wouldn't even know of its existence, or how dangerous of a creature or entity it really is. In fact, even those tasked with containing SCP-2317 wouldn't know the truth of its containment until it was far too late. And as awful or as scary as that may seem, if we didn't know the end of the world was happening until it just happened, we wouldn't really have much time to fully understand what's going on. And I think we'd be better off that way. Rather than worrying about when SCP-2317 will break free and destroy the Earth and human civilization as we know it, we'll just go about our day in normal lives until one day we just simply cease to exist. It seems that really is the only option because the SCP really has no way of containing SCP-2317, even if they don't know it yet. Now thankfully guys, as with all of our SCP videos, well this is just a hypothetical question. There is no evil entity in another dimension just waiting to destroy our world, at least that we know of. And if there is and we don't know about it, well, not much we can do. Oddly enough, this situation sounds just like the SCP I explained. Well, like I previously mentioned, we're better off not knowing if something like that will happen until it does.
Throughout history, humanity has had a bit of a habit of devising ever increasingly demonic ways to torture its citizens and ultimately end their lives in the most painful and excruciating ways possible. Particularly throughout the medieval period of Europe, torture devices boomed in frequency as mad kings and evil seneschals alike delved deep into the pits of dark human ingenuity, bolstering their arsenals with racks, spikes, traps, brazen bulls, rats in buckets, and anything else that they could conjure up from the creation of their nightmarish minds. Perhaps one of the most terrifying of these contraptions is the infamous Iron Maiden, and as is always the case, the SCP Foundation have one particular entry that may change the way you look at the ultimate goal of medieval torture. Hello internet, what's going on? And once again, welcome back to the most inquisitive channel on YouTube, Life's Biggest Questions. As per usual, I'll be your disembodied floating voice, Jack Finch, as today we curiously ask the question, what if SCP-762 was real? Funny, aren't I? For the curious amongst you, that clip was, of course, from Tim Burton's 1999 gothic classic Sleepy Hollow, because, well, it's pretty difficult to find any kind of cinematic depiction of an Iron Maiden, as you'd imagine, really. Also, that film is surprisingly awesome, and any chance I get at showing Ichabod Crane being a weird gothic badass, I will. That's all there is to it, really. And you may be asking, what the hell, Jack? What are you talking about? Iron Maiden? Aren't they one of the greatest British heavy metal bands ever formed? Well, yes, of course they are, but no. Not that Iron Maiden, because let me introduce you to SCP-762, which despite being only a brief entry into the Foundation's containment and one of the earliest entries in the Foundation's history, there's actually quite a bit more to this particular anomalous device than first meets the eye. First though, let's set the scene. As the record states, SCP-762 is a torture device similar to the infamous Iron Maiden of Nuremberg. For those of you that don't know, this particular contraption was a particularly gruesome execution device, even for medieval Europe standards, that consisted of an iron cabinet with a hinged front, adorned with a metal spiked covered interior, sufficiently tall enough to enclose an adult human being inside. It's also important to note that whilst the first grim stories involving the use of the Iron Maiden as a torture method were first composed sometime in the 19th century, the use of this device in particular is widely considered to be a myth from the century before that was heightened by the belief that the people of the Middle Ages were barbaric, violent, and uncivilized, which in most cases they were, but as far as the Iron Maiden is concerned, it's kind of like a nasty rumour in high school that got way out of hand. However, in this hypothetical situation, there may be a much more anomalous explanation for the Iron Maiden's murky origins. SCP-762 was first recovered sometime in the early 20th century from a box found in the basement of a wealthy benefactor in the mountainous regions of Austria. For the most part, SCP-762 is classified as a safe object, and so its containment procedures are relatively straightforward, as it is currently housed inside a storage crate at an undisclosed Foundation site. As SCP-762 does not appear to be dangerous to anyone unless they're placed inside of it, no further precautions are required, and Foundation staff are free to experiment with the anomalous object, although they must be given prior authorization by Dr. Wright, a particular Foundation researcher and analyst that specializes in the more bizarre and the macabre aspects of the Foundation's work. You see, it's not necessarily because of the device itself, but instead what was found inside. After first being contained by the Foundation, when opened, 762 was found to have a male human inside, now referred to as SCP-762-2. When he was first discovered inside, the unknown male had a number of the device's large spikes violently embedded in his flesh in a gory mass, but once he was removed from the device, suddenly and instantly all of his wounds had healed. Other than being completely catatonic, the man was found to be in decent health, save for several rotten teeth and a large scar on his left arm. Now, is that small detail incredibly important to this hypothetical situation? Well, it could be, because whoever this strange anomalous man was would have played a large part in the reason he was encased inside the Iron Maiden. You see, given his unique properties, the Foundation deemed it impossible to determine how long 762-2 was in the device, but research has shown that it dates back to at least the 15th century, and it's entirely possible that the man may have been in the device for centuries before being discovered. As the Foundation subsequently discovered, any person that is placed inside the Iron Maiden object of SCP-762 appears to enter a state of suspended animation. Subjects no longer need food, water, or even air when inside the contraption, and also appear to be immune to any effects of disease, injury, or even aging. Yeah, you know where this is going, right? The real question isn't why are people being placed inside an immortal macabre torture device that keeps them alive forever. It's what kind of people would need to be imprisoned inside an immortal macabre torture device that keeps them alive forever. You see, the interesting thing that SCP-762 addresses is that historically in the real world these devices were never actually used as a method of torture. In fact, for the most part, the infamous Iron Maiden of legend was more of a grim, dark yet stylish piece of furniture for wealthier collectors throughout 18th century Europe that had a fascination with the darker side of human ingenuity, as far as we know. Anyway, like many things, the machinations of SCP-762 seem to conflict with the historical description of this particular anomalous object. But it is food for thought, right? If this object did indeed exist, perhaps at the hands of an evil, ingenious king or someone of a similar ilk, would they have paid the painful price to be immortalized, encased in the confines of 762, waiting patiently to be discovered by modern civilization, where they could seemingly be resurrected right now in 2019, where presumably they'd unleash an ancient malevolent curse and bring ruin to our fair planet? Just kidding, but that's how these things usually end, right? The fact of the matter is, cryoengineering and suspended animation has long been a hypothetical concept only ever addressed in the confines of science fiction. But if we flip that precedent and imagine the vast wealth of anomalous antiques, black market, cursed objects, and other such devices similar to 762 that may or may not already exist on the market, the reversal of these immortal implications offer a strange perspective as to the price of eternal life. Hypothetically speaking, if you were some wealthy baron in medieval Europe and someone offered you the chance at immortality and all it involved was stepping inside his iron, spike-filled contraption, would you do it? I mean, I don't want to be the first one to find out. Put it that way.
SCP-3199 is not a subject you want to come in contact with. In addition to being extremely hostile toward human life, SCP-3199 has proven to be very difficult to eradicate. Its reproductive capabilities allow it to continue existing, regardless of how many subjects are killed. So what if SCP-3199 was real? That's the question we are asking right now on Life's Biggest Questions. SCP-3199 is described as a sentient humanoid species of an unknown biological origin, but tissue samples taken have shown traces of domestic chicken and chimpanzee DNA. Weird. SCP-3199 is hairless and stained with a thin layer of globular protein called albumin. It stands at 2.9 meters tall. Adults weigh 780 kilograms and hatchlings weigh 360 kilograms. The characteristic most notable about SCP-3199 is its neck, which appears to be dislocated. It is able to twist its neck almost 360 degrees, 340 degrees to be exact. First discovered in Ireland following reports of an unidentified bald creature, quote, crying like a banshee from within a dense woodland area. When personnel went to contain it, two were lost in action. Their internal organs and jaws were almost completely dissolved. Once contained and while being transported, SCP-3199 produced 2 offspring, who further killed 6 more personnel. By all accounts, SCP-3199 is highly dangerous. SCP-3199 used to be classified as Euclid, but has been reclassified as Keter on the 10th of June 2017 after a containment breach. The water containment method once used has been replaced with a resin solution. Keter SCPs display vigorous hostility toward humans, civilizations, and/or space-time, and are capable of causing significant destruction in the event of a containment breach. Keter SCPs must be contained, catalogued, and destroyed if possible. SCP-3199 specimens are hunters that seek out prey within a radius of 0.6 kilometers of their hatchlings. They can travel at up to 25 kilometers an hour. If it comes across a human or animal, SCP-3199 will perform some sort of attack. Can't explain it for you because it was redacted from documents, but the attack somehow liquefies the prey's internal organs and bone structure. The corpse is then taken to its hatchlings for sustenance. SCP-3199's hatchlings start as eggs, incubating in the subject's stomach, then esophagus, then out through the mouth, accompanied by a red, viscous substance that is highly corrosive. When SCP-319 is giving birth, it shows signs of extreme distress. Some personnel have witnessed SCP-3199 creating a sound very similar to a scream while giving birth. Its eggs are very resilient and have not shown visible signs of damage when exposed exposed to extreme blunt force trauma, extreme pressure, high precision blades, and long-term acid exposure. It would appear that SCP-3199's eggs are indestructible. The only method of extermination not tested yet is point-blank explosives, but up until this point, exposure to extreme heat has resulted in eggs hatching sooner than expected. So why does SCP-3199 produce so many eggs? The theory is that in order to avoid extinction, SCP-3199 produces eggs to fill available space. The problem with SCP-3199 is it's able to produce many eggs, quite possibly an infinite amount. Killing SCP-3199 specimens is not difficult, but getting rid of them completely is proving to be quite difficult. All instances of SCP-3199, regardless of how old they are, carry one egg in their stomach at all times. This ensures survival of their species. So now that you know a little about SCP-3199, let's talk about what would happen if it were real. As long as it continues to be contained, it poses no threat to human life or human civilization. But seeing as the specimen has already breached containment, another breach might be possible. SCP-3199 is contained at Site-114, which is filled entirely with distilled water and treated with Class A sedatives in order to contain SCP-3199. So, does it have any weaknesses? Thankfully, the SCP Foundation's containment methods are very effective in countering SCP-3199's reproductive properties. While contained in liquid, regardless of thickness or clarity, SCP-3199 appears to enter an inert state. There are currently two theories that exist for this. SCP-3199 could be very afraid of drowning, and while immersed in liquid, its needs for survival are focused entirely on not drowning. And theory number 2, SCP-3199 could consider the liquid it's surrounded by to be a full space, and does not produce any young when submerged. The second theory is far more plausible. All is well unless for some reason, perhaps by human error, SCP-3199 subjects are no longer submerged. If it somehow manages to breach containment, the human race would be at serious risk. Not only does SCP-3199 absolutely detest humans, their species is extremely difficult to get rid of, their eggs in particular. If SCP-3199 was real, every test imaginable would be conducted to attempt to destroy its eggs. And until a solution is found, humans would go under complete lockdown. Considering the aggressive reproductive habits of this SCP, specimens would spread quickly. Humans who are not familiar with it would attempt to destroy eggs, using methods proven to be detrimental, spawning more and more creations of SCP-3199. There would be many deaths before we get a handle on the dire situation, but many members of the public would start to come across solutions for the spread of SCP-3199. For example, seeing as extreme heat makes the eggs hatch quicker, perhaps methods such as extreme cold to the point of freezing would prevent the hatching of SCP-3199's eggs. In order to contain adult specimens, traps could be set, where they are drawn into enclosed spaces with human bait, then those spaces are filled with distilled water and sedatives. This would have to be done until all SCP-3199 specimens are contained.
Have you ever heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch? No? Well, you should, because it's pretty damn insane. Also known as the Pacific Trash Vortex, it's essentially a great big heap of plastic, chemical sludge and other such nautical debris that has been trapped by the ever-swirling currents of the North Pacific Gyre. According to recent estimations, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch covers over 1.6 million square kilometers, covering over 8,000 metric tons of plastic, and if that's not already messed up enough, there's another one growing in the North Atlantic. You see, the point is, it's hard for us to garner any kind of perspective on the vast expanse of our oceans, and we may never know exactly what's lurking out there. Well, in that case, let me introduce you to SCP-455, and this one is pretty messed up. Hello internet, what's going on? And once again, welcome back to the most inquisitive channel on YouTube, Life's Biggest Questions. As per usual, I'll be your disembodied floating voice, Jack Finch, as today we curiously ask the question, what if SCP-455 was real? Roll the clip. For the curious amongst you, that clip was from Christopher Smith's mind-bending 2009 horror thriller, Triangle, and if you know anything about that movie, then you'll know that it involves a terrifying anomalous maze of a shipwreck, and as it's pretty fitting when we apply it to today's hypothetical spark of a thought. But let's not beat about the bush, because if I had to choose between being trapped in either that ship or SCP-455, I'm choosing the ship from Triangle any day. Trust me guys, 455 is messed up. But before we dive down deep into its anomalous implications, it's probably best that we first paint a terrifying picture as to what exactly is going on. As the record states, SCP-455 is a large cargo ship that is currently run aground just off of the southern coast of Chile. Most of its frame is underwater and badly damaged, with rust coating 85 to 90% of all of its surfaces. Its internal structure appears to be significantly larger than external dimensions, and that's fit to play a rather large part in the wider implications of this anomaly. But for now, we'll just accept the fact that it's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, just like the TARDIS of Doctor Who fame, except this one wants to eat your flesh. Sorry, I've said too much already. One of this entity's most intriguing paradox is the fact that otherwise being a rusty hull of a shipwreck, SCP-455 is not flooded, despite large holes visible in and around its outer hull. And that bizarre material mystery is just the start of it. But before we dive into exactly what's waiting beneath 455's rusted metal shell, it's perhaps much more important that we preface this particular question with a more broader one. Could a shipwreck such as SCP-455 exist somewhere out there in our oceans without yet being found? And the terrifying truth of the matter is yes. Yes, it really could. In fact, a rough estimation by UNESCO puts more than 3 million shipwrecks out there on the ocean floor that have succumbed to the murky blue over our civilization's history. In fact, there are so many undiscovered shipwrecks beneath the waves that following the airline tragedy of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, rescue crews discovered 2 ancient shipwrecks. By accident, 175 warships and 783 submarines were lost to the deep blue sea, the majority of which have never been recovered. There is an estimated $60 billion in sunken treasure that is lay scattered around the world, waiting for some lucky deep sea diver at the bottom of the ocean. And whilst that sounds absolutely amazing, full of more adventure and excitement than the whole Uncharted video game series, in this specific case, SCP-455 is the last wreckage you'd ever want to stumble upon, because if you did, you're about to become much more involved than you'd ever have anticipated. SCP-455 is an anomalous thorn in the Foundation's side, and it is so incomprehensibly mind-bending that remains to be perhaps the least explored entity within the Foundation's containment. And containment in this case is a loose term, as there are no special containment procedures for this particular SCP, as no personnel are permitted to remain in close proximity to the entity for more than 5 minutes, and all physical contact with the structure is strictly forbidden. Any individuals who are found to break this order are to be quarantined, although the anomalous damage is more than likely too late to be reversed. So what's the big deal, eh? It's just a shipwreck, right? Alright, maybe it's a little bit creepy, but it can't be that bad, right? No. Wrong. Within the actual wreckage, the internal structure of SCP-455 appears to be a random assembly of rooms, halls, and structures that almost seem to function like the labyrinth of legend, ever shifting, almost corporeal in the sense that it has a mind of its own. Initially, when the Foundation was still stupid enough to try and explore the place, salvage teams reported entire rooms made out of human teeth, an engine with tendon strips for timing bouts, a large gym room with steel walls that were as pliant as taffy, and an endless series of twists and turning corridors that defied the spatial parameters of the ship's structure. The entity appears to exhibit strange temporal properties with time, too. To date, the Foundation has sent 3 mobile task force squads into SCP-455 to explore its structure, which from the outside should be a relatively straightforward job, as it exhibits no more than 5 floors even when viewed by diving teams from beneath. But in every exploration, the result has usually found each task force either being lost entirely or recovered after transmission has been lost entirely. In some cases, this has spanned over weeks. The leading prognosis is that SCP-455 is some kind of ancient living entity that is comprised of amorphous rust and metal that was never meant to be alive but thinks it is, and now takes the form of an unsuspecting shipwreck to lure in its victims. Wow. Now, obviously, the Foundation has wisened up to this fact, and they're no longer willing to sacrifice personnel to explore it, and thankfully, they'll be leaving the robots to do that. But if SCP-455 was handled by any other organization, the luckiest thing that they could ever hope for is for it to remain as one of the 97% unexplored shipwrecks lost to the depths of the ocean forever. You see, there is one thing that we appear to have left out in the anomalous cautionary tale of 455. Out of all the recovered test logs and nearly every mobile task force member that was lost to the endless winding metal and rust, they all found the same thing at the bottom of their terrifying descent. food. At the point of starvation with rations depleted, well, of course, as any human being would, they ate that food, but only moments after eating the food offered by the anomalies of SCP-455. So, well, now you know. If you just so happen to be a deep-sea diver or anyone otherwise interested in the recovery of ancient shipwrecks at the bottom of the ocean bed, then please, even if you're in pursuit of your fortune, leave SCP-455 well alone. You've been warned. Well, there we have it, our cautionary tale for what you should expect if you ever have the misfortune of stumbling upon the wreckage of SCP-455. Don't go inside, please. What's going on, guys? As always, I'll be your disembodied floating voice, Jack Finch, as we dive back into the depths of the SCP Foundation, figure out just when the hell we're going to give up this ruse as we peel back the soundproof padding, take one step forward, and ask the question, what if SCP-087 was real? Roll the clip.
When I was going up the stairs, I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. I wish he'd go away.
In 1899, inspired by the reports of a strange, eerie ghost that would constantly roam the stairs of a haunted house in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, a poet named William Hughes Mearns famously penned his poem, The Little Man Who Wasn't There. It inspires in us a strange, ethereal sense of equal parts familiarity and the uncanny. But like with most things, the world of the SCP Foundation takes that feeling one step further. Enter SCP-087, and oh boy, you better just keep walking. Before we slide on down into that though, you know the drill by now, guys. If you're a fan of this video, the SCP Foundation, John Cusack maybe, or just LBQ in general, then go ahead and give this video a thumbs up and ding that subscribe bell so you can stay up to date with our latest and greatest uploads. If you'd like to get in touch with myself and the creative team here at Life's Biggest Questions, then take a peek at the info box down below. On with the show. Have you ever been walking down a staircase, perhaps late at night, when you get that strange, eerie feeling that something or someone is following you? Not in the sense that footsteps are in pursuit or echoing voices, but that feeling that you're being watched in such a tight space. Well, let me introduce you to SCP-087, and those fears will soon be mutated into a much more desperate beast. 087 is a Euclid-class amorphous object located on the campus of an undisclosed United States university that appears to be an infinite staircase. The doorway leading up to SCP-087 is constructed out of reinforced steel with an electric release lock. The mechanism on the doorknob will not release unless it's given a redacted amount of voltage. That's a measurement. In conjunction with the counterclockwise rotation of the key. It's been disguised to resemble a janitorial closet consistent with the design of the building. Sounds harmless enough? Well, it's pretty important to note that absolutely no personnel are permitted access to SCP-087 on account of the horrors that lie within, and that's not despite trying, believe me. In layman's terms, SCP-087 is an unlit platform staircase, and despite the large amorphous ghostly face and the incessant small child crying in the darkness, that's about as unassuming as it comes. Oh right, we forgot to mention that, right? Each staircase is roughly 13 steps, descending at a 38-degree angle before reaching a semicircular platform approximately 3 meters in diameter. And that's it. On, creeping forever downward toward who knows where. The design of SCP-087 limits subjects to a visual range of approximately 1.5 flights of stairs, and there are no lighting fixtures or windows present. Lighting sources brighter than 75 watts have shown to be ineffective, as the staircase itself seems to absorb excess light itself. Of the 4 expeditions that the Foundation have operated on SCP-087, each of them have reported and confirmed the distressed vocalizations of what is presumed to be a child of an indeterminate age. Expeditions and video feeds have also confirmed the existence of an SCP-087-1, an amorphous entity which appears as a face with no visible pupils, nostrils, or mouth. And that's about all we know of it, which is terrifying, right? It poses an incredibly interesting question, which I think rests on the function of Class D personnel and their role in the Foundation's experimentation. In 087's canon, 4 Class D prisoners have been sent into the staircase, 1 of which survived, 1 of which became comatose, and 2 of which are now deemed MIA. For all intents and purposes, you could likely say that SCP-087 is a sinkhole for human resources. Pardon the pun. Think about it, even an unexplored cavern has an ending, right? Scramblers and cave divers alike willingly plunge into the unknown, risking their lives because there's a thrill in exploring the unexplored. But what about the unexplorable? It's human nature to want to conquer curiosity. Hell, it's the sole function of the Foundation itself if you really break it all down. But how far would that curiosity go? What would be the ultimate price we'd pay for an answer, essentially. How many Class D personnel would it take to get that answer? Yeah, I hear what you're saying. If an infinite cosmic staircase was real and we knew that there was a creepy floating head somewhere down there, we'll probably send a drone or a bomb disposal robot down there before we start sending down meat sacks, but come on, that's not the Foundation's style. We all know that. Why build a robot when you can use a Class D, which demonstrates much more movability and, sentience? Also, I guess they serve a function in themselves, but this is really where we get to the crux of our answer. Just like the poem by William Hughes Mearns, last night I saw upon the stair a little man
He wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. Oh, how I wish he'd go away.
Well, that's exactly how we deal with things, because that's how the Foundation deals with this particular enigma. Ignorance is bliss. If SCP-087 was real, we'd seal the door and leave it shut, because some things are just better left unsolved. Right? Now, the real root of this question is, how does the SCP Foundation deal with the unknown? And more importantly, is their role as an overseeing organization of anomalous entities effective in its means of discerning the truth? Enter SCP-106. On the surface, an awful, sinister, malignant force whose sole purpose is to wreak death and decay on whatever happens to be unlucky enough to cross its path. But is there more to it? Well, let's find out. Before we chomp on that rotten hunk of flesh of a question though, you know the drill by now folks. If you're a fan of this video, the SCP Foundation, general death and decay, or just LBQ itself, then be a dear and hit that thumbs up button, as well as that subscribe bell so you can stay up to date with our latest SCP based uploads. On with the show. SCP-106, or the Old Man, is a Keter class anomaly that appears to resemble an elderly humanoid, displaying the general appearance of advanced decay and decomposition. Now, don't get us wrong, because this won't be the only vile visage it displays, and its appearance may vary from encounter to encounter. But one thing rings true with this skip: it is rot incarnate. The very vision of decay, SCP-106 is in no way exceptionally agile like many other Keter class skips, nor does it display incredible feats of strength. Its modus operandi is to remain motionless at days at a time, waiting for its prey, like an evil grandma pretending to doze off in her chair. SCP-106 is capable of scaling any vertical surface and can remain suspended upside down indefinitely. During its method of attack, it will usually attempt to incapacitate any prey by damaging the target's major organs, muscle groups, or tendons, particularly the Achilles heel, then pull its disabled prey into its pocket dimension. What's a pocket dimension, you may ask? Well, we'll get into that shortly. One strange, unknown characteristic, one of many when dealing with SCP-106, is that it appears to prefer human prey within the age bracket of 10 to 25 years. Why? Well, alongside being a creature of death, decay, and corruption, it also appears to harbour a hatred for youth and the brightness of light and life. 106 causes a corrosion effect in all of the solid matter that it touches, which swiftly results in the physical breakdown of most known materials several seconds after contact. It is often observed as rusting, rotting, and a trademark cracking of materials, almost like a barren desert, and then the resulting creation of a black, mucus-like substance similar to the material that coats its body, if you could call it that. The substance is particularly detrimental, scratch that, highly detrimental to living tissues, and is often assumed to be a pre-digestive action, slathering up the goose in butter, so to speak. Now, let's talk about that pocket dimension. It's no small point that SCP-106 is capable of passing through solid matter, leaving in its wake a smear of corrosive mucus like some abyssal, evil, and ancient slug. It is entirely able to vanish within solid matter, entering inside what is assumed to be a form of its pocket dimension. Of course, as you would imagine, limited observation of this pocket dimension has taken place because, well, if you're in there, you're most likely dead. Special containment procedures have been revised time and time again, and the latest revision has deemed that any objects or personnel lost within its decaying world are deemed to be missing or KIA. It's like the Upside Down, but, well, so much worse. What we do know about this pocket dimension though is that it has shown to be comprised of mostly long halls and rooms. You know those nightmares you have where you're being chased by an evil force down long corridors? Yeah, it's that. Strangely enough though, this correlates with one cross-referenced article in the Foundation archives that perhaps points a finger towards whatever the hell this thing is. One of the leading theories in the origin of SCP-106 is that of the tale of the young man, which poses a more direct question to our answer if true, something along the lines of what if war war was personified. The record of the young man takes place back in World War I, in the nightmarish trenches of France, perhaps the Somme or Flanders fields, but nobody is quite sure. It involves a strange man named Corporal Lawrence, who for the most part is very likely to be SCP-106. It's important to note that this is only one possible origin of 106, however likely it may seem. It is theorized that Corporal Lawrence was already an anomalous entity, characterized by his strange behavior and his general disdain from his peers. He was a peculiar man who exuded a bleak presence. That is, until an altercation in a German trench where Corporal Lawrence fell into an anomalous pit of vile black sludge, not dissimilar to the substance that SCP-106 exudes. After that, he was a changed man, but not for the better. Manic and rambling, who'd whisper constantly about long halls and corridors, pursuits in the dark, and flesh laid out like the pages of a book. Perhaps it was shell shock, a terrible mental affliction on the survivors of war, or maybe, just maybe, that's where SCP-106 began, the result of humanity's drive to kill one another. As Franklin D. Roosevelt said, war is young men dying and old men talking.